Um, Good morning, Gabriela, and thank you for joining me today. Uh, I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk about a very important topic to myself and our team here at UNIMED. To provide a short background to our conversation today, I wanted to remind us that in 2015, the United Nations established 17 development goals as a plan to build a greener, fair, and better world by 2030. And today I wanted to talk to you about Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which concerns gender equality. This particular goal strongly resonates with me, and that's why here at UNIMED I chose to be ambassador of this particular goal, and I wanted to have this conversation with you today. So gender equality is a fundamental human right and a cornerstone of a fairer society. I think it's, despite significant progress which we have achieved over the years, inequality between genders still persists, unfortunately, nowadays, and in various domains of our life, and from the workplace or education and beyond, we unfortunately still observe these issues related to gender equality. So today I wanted to have this conversation and just really aim to explore the challenges and opportunities in achieving true gender equality and discuss your personal experiences and views on this very important sustainable development goal, but also very important goal for me personally. So I would like to discuss your perception of gender equality as well as some actionable steps probably we can take as individual, but also as a society to create a more inclusive and equitable world for everyone. So let's just dive into this conversation now. And first of all, I'd like to thank you once again for agreeing to take part in this conversation, but also I would like to ask you please to introduce yourself, including your name, your current role at Maternova, and when you started working at Maternova.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Tanya, for having me. I'm very passionate about this topic as well. My name is Gabriela Salvador. I'm Maternova's CEO. I've worked with Maternova for close to 2 years now. And Maternova is a marketplace where we look at innovations, particularly for women's and newborns' health, and innovations that could then we can bring to market and try to reduce preventable women mortality and newborn mortality.
Right, it's important, very important role that you have, Gabriela. But it must be very demanding role as well. So to provide some context, could you please share a bit about your background, such as where you were born and raised and your career, your family? It would be interesting just to understand more how you achieve that CEO role at Maternova. But what creates Gabriela as you are today?
Oh, a long road. So I'm originally from Argentina, from the northwest. At the time was a small town called Salta. I was raised there in a family of 6 children. I studied medicine. Initially, I went to the field of ophthalmology, then got training in pediatric ophthalmology in the US, and went back to Latin America to practice. And it was then that it became very obvious to me that the sickest children, the worst cases, there was a pattern, a correlation between poverty and how serious the cases were. So basically, access to health services was so complicated, right? The poorer you were, that outcomes were very uneven between people who had resources and people who didn't. So I wanted to tackle that. I had no clue how to do it. I had no training. I decided to come back to the US to get training. I did public health and went to the field of health financing. And since then, I've been working in global health, in women's health, for almost 15 years now in various roles, right? So it has been a whole experience understanding that to solve a problem, you need to understand how to see it from very different perspectives, right? That things are more complex than they seem, and that we need a lot of exposure and we need a lot of training, and we need a lot of open-mindedness, right, to try to solve for issues. So it's been a road, and it continues to be a road for me.
That's impressive, and I really am grateful for you to talk about it, to be part of this journey, and your role which you play in global health actually every day by developing, creating new product, by promoting these initiatives. And in that regard, I wanted to actually now ask, what does gender equality mean to you? And how has your understanding of gender equality evolved over time, that, in your journey over those 15 years? Would you be able to comment on that, please?
Oh, absolutely. And it's really a lifetime. So I think I've learned a lot in the later years of my life, but we've been exposed to this. We are all, right, since we are born. So for me, if you ask me, gender equality is about equal opportunity and respect about individual choices. So in an ideal world, you look at other people as people, regardless of gender or race or whatever, right? And and most importantly, to respect people's choices. So my starting point, understanding really gender equality, was very, very, very low, if I have to be honest, right? And I think I have learned a lot. But I come from a Latino culture, so a macho culture, right, with a strong preconceived idea regarding gender roles. And I did what I could to raise the bar for myself, but really not as a feminist as I thought at the time I was, but really as still part of the macho culture. I realize now that I wasn't fighting for women, I was fighting for myself. And I saw myself, right, as an exception to the rule. So I was, in a way, I have to admit, dismissive of women. I personally thought of women as, in general, as weak, right? And that was, well, obviously very wrong of me, because I was not aware that what I had that other women didn't was not character or determination, but mostly opportunity. So my parents raised all of their 6 children with the same expectation in terms of where they set the bar, and they gave us all the same opportunities. It didn't matter if we were boys or girls. So in reality, my family was the outlier, not me. And it was when I was working in Nicaragua in Central America that I first got a glimpse of my bias and how little I understood the real gender issues. So I was working with a microfinance and a health organization, and I was in charge of all the health programs in several countries. So I needed a health director for Nicaragua. And I got many resumes, many CVs, and my position was extremely clear. I would hire the most qualified individual, irrespective of gender. That was my position, right? When I told this to the country office director, who is a true self-made Nicaraguan feminist icon, Gloria Ruiz, she told me to reconsider. She said, look, women in this country do not have the same opportunity than men, right? So they could never compete on paper at the resume level, but give them a chance and they will bring the attitude and the determination, and they will learn fast. And I did not follow her advice at first, and I chose the man. And in the end, this man was not sensitive to the fact that he was leading the health area of a women organization. And eventually it backfired. And it was then that I realized that Gloria was right. And that if I started giving opportunities to the right women, they would deliver. And I have to say that it is to this date that outside of basic skills, what I look for in a candidate when hiring is attitude. And my contribution to level the field is that most of my hires since then have been women, and I have not been disappointed.
It's amazing. It's a great story. It's a great learning curve, but also it's fantastic how you personally developed and gave that opportunity to women. And that's what we want to see, actually. We want to have ladies, girls, women around the world to be more empowered, to be given chances to actually not to prove anything, but just be there and show the best that they can do. So actually, that question really develops now to into my next question about your current perceptions of the challenges and benefits related to gender equality in the sector you work in. So how does it work currently? Could you please elaborate on your personal views regarding gender equality in your sector and how
Yeah.
this affected or benefited you in your own experience?
That's a question. I mean, I always struggle with, because for one, right, the fact that gender inequality has been named as a problem to be solved as opposed to a natural order has been, I think, the biggest and at the same time the most basic step forward, right? And so now there are programs built around each of the named targets. And yes, I think there has been an increase in resources allocated to obviously improve outcomes, and there have been gains without question. But the truth is, to me, my opinion, is that those gains come at a pace that if we continue with the same implementation guides and strategy based on the same assumptions, it will be centuries before we level the gender field, right? The challenges, in my opinion, have to do with how we disaggregate gender disparities to tackle them as a health issue or a labor issue or an access to technology issue, each separate kind of from each other, right? So each area is addressed individually. So an analogy to this would be when you have a patient as a doctor, right, in front of you, and you're only looking at the liver or the heart or the kidney without addressing the whole, right? And as a doctor, that only takes you so far and makes everything definitely more ineffective, right? And significantly more expensive. And I think we all agree that gender disparities cut across all sectors. That's not debatable, right? But somehow, all proposed solutions tend to be very siloed. And too often, we see that one gain in one area is limited by lack of improvements in other areas. So what I'm saying by no means implies that we should stop, right? But we have to, I believe we have to involve different sectors that do not naturally sit at the same decision-making table to try to address things more holistically. Because in the end, right, um, the same women that everybody's working on the same target. So the same women who buy gas, need the education, get sick, need a job, suffer from domestic violence, or get pregnant. So initiatives that are too siloed um, uh, uh, don't necessarily help, because take even one sector, let's say health alone, right? You have, I've seen this in the field so many times, you have a whole army of people and resources reaching that woman, that patient, that client, just to address one thing, HRV or pregnancy or TB or contraception. So all the resources addressing one organ, one disease, and not a complex social being, right? So you have no idea how many times I have seen in health women who have a clear, urgent health issue being approached with resources to solve for a program related target that has nothing to do with that woman's current priorities. And program implementers being completely inflexible because they are hired to respond to one issue and one issue alone. So their true target is meeting the metrics of the donor or sponsor and not the woman in front of them. And truth is, their hands are tied because they have to comply with what they have been hired to do. But to me, this is the eternal problem of top-down solution. There is no empowerment of the beneficiaries because they do not have a true say in terms of what is important to them. So I think that for all the resources that we're putting into solving gender disparities, we need to be more open to listen to the women and respect what they prioritize and have flexibility in resource allocation and help them, because if we do not give them agency and decision-making power, they will never get respect. So at the end of the day, we're making the decision
Absolutely.
for them. And sometimes what is important to them does not necessarily match the global agenda. And to me, that is the critical point, because equality is about opportunity and agency and tolerance and respect for what others choose for themselves. So the more we said we are in our ways, the more silo we become in our objectives, and the more we cease to see the big picture. And I think life is too complex to be limited to that, right? And
Absolutely.
I'm not trying to minimize that. Is that for implementers, it's always frustrating.
It is. Appreciate it. It's a very interesting point of view, and how your perspective is truly different from what I've been observing, on a major scale. But uh, I'm really grateful for you for expressing yourself so passionately about it. And another question, or actually to probably slightly continue on the previous point. I don't know if you have any experiences which you have witnessed or experienced of gender inequality, if you're happy to share, or just talk about it a little bit more.
In general terms, what I've like my personal view or my personal experience, me as an individual.
Either way, or whatever comes to mind, if at all. I mean, have you ever witnessed gender inequality in your in your previous career, in your current role? Obviously, probably you won't be talking about this, or where you just witnessed general gender inequality, which really made your blood boil.
Oh God.
Any even on
It's
a,
all the time.
let's
It's
say,
everywhere. It's
yeah.
everywhere all the time. I think that even for places where we think we're closer to gender equality, the differences are striking. Even when you move everything supposedly in favor of the women, the unintended consequences of not fully doing it right are striking. And I can give an example. I mean, and of course, when we talk about these issues, women that are worst off to me come first. So an example that I can give you is I was once in a very, very rural area in Tanzania. And they had these babies in incubators. They were very premature. And I've worked with premature babies, and the outcomes can be extremely crippling for the baby if mismanaged. And the reality is that there was not a single neonatologist, not even a pediatrician in that hospital. Right? Yet the
Wow.
baby was kept alive. And we're talking about people in extreme poverty. So if that baby would survive, it would be with such severe disabilities that it would be really, it would have a lot of consequences for the siblings of those babies or for the family. And so I asked the doctor in charge, why are you doing this? And her response was, because I much rather send that mother back to her home with a baby with extremely severe disabilities to die at home than to send her back with a dead baby, because sending her back with a dead baby would be her being absolutely ostracized. And I said, the issue here is not fertility, it's not contraception, it's not a survivor, is what is your social value, right? So
Right.
in society, what do you bring? What are you worth? And if you don't change that, right, the rest is just a consequence. You cannot ask that woman to take contraceptives if her only value is as a mother, because then she loses
Absolutely.
all her value in society. And that's why I say when we start having siloed interventions, right, we're missing the big picture. And so for me, that I was, I wouldn't say outraged, but it was very sobering, because I was very much pro kind of family planning, which I'm still are, but without context, we cannot help, right? And again, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if that woman doesn't have financial independence, doesn't have decision-making power in the family, then how do you change the rest? So that's an example. On the complete opposite end, let's take the most developed countries, right? You have women with the expectation of being professionals and in leadership positions and everything, and set up that career. And so the new business is freezing eggs, because there is no room to accommodate to the fact that you, if you also want to be a mother, right, it should not jeopardize your career.
Yes.
So, and it should not put you at risk later in life because biologically you cannot carry a baby. It's like these things, right? For me, is I don't have a solution for these things. I have to be honest with you, right? But for me, are eye-opening that the more silo we become in our interventions, the more there are unintended consequences that don't necessarily help everybody. That doesn't mean that we don't try, it's that we have to try better.
Absolutely. And on that point, do you think we should try as individuals, or still governments and international organizations, for example, what role do they play in advancing gender equality? Because this is striking, especially as you mentioned in that country, in Tanzania, or in other countries in Africa. We hear a lot of stories about gender inequality. So, what role do governments and international organizations, and we actually, can play in promoting, advancing gender equality? What can we do?
Honestly, through my career, I've toyed with many ideas and proposals, and the more I live and the more I learn, in a way, the more humble I become. So, for example, policy changes are very important, right? There is no question about that. But as we know, and it's very clear, right? Policies are subject to government fluctuations, right? And eventually to votes. So the systemic change in the end needs to be also bottom up, so resilient to fluctuations at the top. There was, I remember a time where the assumption was you change the policy and everything changes. And I don't think that's necessarily true. And that it has to be both ways, because if you have resiliency at the bottom, then uh, fluctuations at the top don't hurt so much, right? And that
Yeah.
in a way for me is individual empowerment. So in more, let's say, general and bold terms, I think we need to stop being so paternalistic or maternalistic, right, in the way we approach women's issues. And and for me, probably, if I have to advocate for something, it would be for youth participation, because it looks to me, at least, that the bigger gains are intergenerational, right? I have a lot of faith in the young generation. I think that I believe that they can do what our generation can't anymore. So there is a point where we're kind of stop evolving and then you have to make room for uh, the new ways of seeing the world, right? That comes from having been raised in a new world. So I think that young people need more representation. So at every level, government, multilateral organizations, NGO companies, sometimes things change because all ideas die with the generations that hold them, right? So we have a role in not only mentoring new generations, but listening to them, their fresh view, and incorporating them into the decision-making table at every level, I think, and in every community. This is true at the top and it's also true at the bottom. And I think we need men and women involved in this for the sake of achieving gender equality. I don't think it's a matter of confrontation or positioning. I think that to move forward, you need the majority to buy in. And the majority is not one gender, it's everybody.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. Honestly, very, very great idea. And we are all humans afterward, right? We just need to get together and keep fighting for this. Not fighting in an aggressive way, but just by raising awareness, by talking about it, both with both genders, actually. Uh, that's where the way forward, basically. We just need to be humans above all.
Yeah.
I just, on another note, I wanted to ask if there are any women in the industry or in general whom you admire, and what traits do you relate to in them?
Hmm. I admire many people. So I would start by saying, right, that intellectual thinking requires reflection, and that requires time. So there are many, I believe, many brilliant women sharing their reflections and advocating in our industry, and I have a lot of respect for them. And I also have come to learn, right, that time to reflect is a luxury, that only those of us who have resources, who do not need to think where the food for tomorrow will come from, right, really have. So the more I understand that, the more I realize that the women that I deeply admire are the thousands of women that I have met through my work in every corner in the world who do not have the luxury of spare time or of a vacation or disposable income. And in all honesty, we never have access to the time and the resources. We know it and they know it. And yet they support each other, they build community, they do everything possible to let their children move one step up on the ladder. And the most striking thing is that they do all this, they live life without resentment. You don't see the people complaining and bitter, even in those situations. And you honestly don't know uh, if I could do it in their circumstances. And it is an extremely humbling experience to meet them. These are the women who I honestly have all my admiration, for whom I have all my admiration and respect.
That's amazing. And again, it's another beautiful answer. To be honest, it's so different, so refreshing perspective. Um, and on that, on the back of this statement, you hopefully have some advice that you would give to these women, or just, some message to those women in this sector who, who you admire so much. Is there any particular word of advice from your, experience you could give them to continue to do what they're doing on a daily basis? Is there any word of wisdom you'd like to share, maybe?
Hmm. I'm still learning to make the disclosure, right? I don't think I found the answers, but I do believe I would say that if you want to help women, right, then the first thing is to respect them and learn to listen and differentiate what is for them an imposition versus what is a choice, right? So when I first started in this field, many times I wrongly assumed that what was important for me as a woman, right, was true for the rest. And with the best of intentions, I would say I push to give them what I thought I would want, right? And that's incredibly entitled, honestly. And in the end, to change things, I believe you need to support the support of the majority. That means that you have to enroll everyone, any gender, to fight for equality. And it's not just a woman's job, right? Gender confrontation feels good in the moment, but hardly works long term for real change. It's a gradual and patient enlisting, right, of people that matter. And as a probably final thing, um, um, I would go back to what I said first. I do believe that gender equality is about opportunities, equal opportunities, and respect. And what I said about me pushing my agenda of what I thought was right in other women, that's what needs to change. Because the fact that we're all women doesn't mean that we all want the same things. And if we don't respect other women that think differently than we do, then we're part of the problem. Because we're enforcing
Absolutely.
gender, we're biased.
Yes, absolutely. And that was actually my next question, but I think you've covered it. That what advice would you give to someone who wants to support gender equality on a daily basis? In our companies, we work, we talk about it, but thinking about those women who live, let's say, in uh, countries of Africa or in Afghanistan, or those girls who don't have access to education, to basic rights, what do we do? I mean, how can we do a small change in our everyday lives to assist, to help, to raise awareness?
Oh, that's a very tough question because the reality is that uh, the world is an unfair place. And I do believe that it's part of human nature and it will always be. We're more hierarchical in a way. I don't know. And it breaks my heart to see lack of opportunity, right? So for me, whatever we can do to give people opportunity, that's the first step, right? And in But once you give people equal opportunities, there are many, many different ways in which you can live life, right? And so whatever
Yes,
works best for you needs to be respected. And it's not the same for each of us. Obviously, we're all socially um, uh, influenced, right? I mean, you belong in your community, and so if basically you have to uh, you have to comply in a way, right? Because we all need that sense of belonging. Because community and we're social beings, that gives us a sense of meaning. And being defiant can be exhilarating, but being too defiant can ostracize us, right? So we all adapt to our context and eventually see what's best for us within that context. And the context for every region might differ, right? And I don't think that's going to change in the short term. But what we need to do is try to get to a baseline, right, where there's no abuse. And that's
that's
a
true.
tall ask,
Yes.
very big ask.
And I mean, we need to do everything we can to give that opportunity to stop abuse and to really change mindset. And that would be a good start, I think, for everyone, for governments, for communities, for individuals. If everyone can do something every day, that will hopefully uh, move us towards a better future, towards achieving some kind of equality. Well, probably the last question for today: what are your hopes for the future of gender equality? Do you think it is achievable to reach by 2030? Are we being very enthusiastic about it, or there is a possibility for a change in the world?
I went from being an idealist to being a very pessimist to then be realist. And if you ask me today, I have a lot of faith in the younger generations. I really think that they've come to the world facing a world that is very different from what we grew up with, that the interconnectivity that exists today, right, is, I mean, the exposure is so different from what we grew up with, right? That we can't see the future. But if we give them the space, they can, right? In the same way
Yeah.
that we evolved from our grandparents and our parents, I think that I place a lot of faith in them. And for all the ways we criticize the new generation or we pinpoint their weaknesses, I think we're getting it wrong. And that's why I do believe that it's extremely important to give space to the new generations because they are part of the solution. I think the difference between them and us is that they can figure out the catalytic effect that we haven't. We set the agenda and it's been incredibly slow, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? I think they can find a way to do it better.
So there is
That's my
hope,
hope.
actually.
For me, there is. For
That's
me,
your
there is.
hope. It's
We just need
amazing.
to be humble enough to realize that no, we don't know better. We have to listen
Absolutely.
to those that are coming next. And for the
Um,
very complicated places, I do believe that investing in the youth is changing mindset, hopefully.
Hopefully, absolutely. Well, Gabriela, thank you so much for sharing your insights today and raising a very, very important points and sharing your experiences on this crucial topic. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. And as we discussed, unfortunately, achieving gender equality requires continuous effort on every level. We need to collaborate. We need to, commit as a society, as individual, to promote, to support, to raise awareness. And by addressing these issues openly and working together, I believe we can really create, hopefully, a more equitable and inclusive world somewhere by 2030 or slightly later, but we are moving in that direction. And by having this conversation, by discussing, by feeling, by raising these topics, I'm sure we will get there eventually. I'm being an optimist here, and obviously by supporting the youth of today, by teaching them right values, by discussing, by leading by example, we will hopefully get there. So thank you so much for being part of this important conversation. I really appreciate your time, and I do hope we will have such conversation again in the future.
Tanya, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And let's keep fighting for the future.
Let's do
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.